if we get activated and we stay in that stress mode, these cells, think about it, the cells that are taken away from their normal daily jobs, and they're going to serve this fight, flight, freeze, whatever reaction we're going to do in the moment, and it stays there for longer periods of time, we're actually taking those cells away from serving us in these other ways.
Yeah.
And that's where some of these harmful things come to us, and that's where things become dangerous for us long term if we get caught up in that stress response.
Hey, welcome back to the Executive Exhale podcast. I am excited to share a guest today named Andrew O'Brien. Andrew, I'm going to give a bit of a description of who you are so people get to know you, and we'll get into this as soon as we can. Andrew is the founder of the Mindblowing Coach. It's a business with a sole mission of boldly and authentically partnering with individuals and organizations in sustainably transcending whatever chronic stress or burnout is plaguing them, just so that they can live life with more meaning, purpose, energy, health, and joy. With 25 years of relevant experience, Andrew holds an MBA in HR management, a BA in communication, and is credentialed as a professional certified coach through the International Coaching Federation. He's also a national board certified health and wellness coach. So am I. I just got that recently. It's amazing, amazing work there. And Society for Human Resource Management senior certified professional. In addition to the offerings available for adults, including virtual one-to-one or one-on-one life coaching services, individual workshops, and group workshops, the Mindblowing Coach also partners with organizations, both for in-person and virtual sessions that are leading to incorporate impactful health and well-being events through presentations, workshops, and classes for their employees that are specifically centered around the topic of stress and stress relief. Such a great fit for the show today. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Tammy, and congrats to you for
Yes.
earning that
Yeah, I
credential.
just got certified. Now I have to get the actual credential. I got the training. Now I'm going for the credential. I'm super excited. This is good stuff. Good stuff. I always like to start the show, obviously, with you, the guest, so that folks can get to know who you are. So maybe if you could share a little bit about your personal journey, what inspired you to dedicate your life in this field, in this domain?
Yeah, so I always say that whether you're a life coach, therapist, if you're in that kind of helping profession, you tend to specialize in the things that you have struggled the most with
Yeah.
and figured out how to overcome them. And so yeah, I live in stress and burnout with working with my clients and organizations that I partner with. And it is because I have struggled
Mm-hmm.
significantly with I call it mastering your stress. I struggled with mastering my stress for years, and as a result, experienced all sorts of symptoms: physical stress symptoms, emotional stress symptoms, behavioral stress symptoms that were not serving me,
Right.
and I didn't like. And it was this last round of burnout that I experienced, which was probably just over 3 years ago at this point. And happy to say that that has been the last time I've experienced burnout. So I'm very grateful for that.
Mm-hmm.
In connection with what I now know and what I apply to my own personal life, it there was a moment there where I was life can't be this. Life can't be this hard. Like life, and I was not clinically, I was not ever diagnosed with depression. I know that is a real thing for people out there. So I don't
Yeah.
want to speak lightly about that topic. But I was feeling very down, and I actually was working with a therapist at the time, and it was in those months of that last round of burnout where I kind of put it all together in in my mind. And what did I put together? Life can't be this. Life
Right.
can't be only this. Just experiencing all of this, like these symptoms and such. Life has to be more than this. And then once I identified like where my burnout was coming from, and there were like two main pieces. Once I identified that, I made changes to get on the other end of that. All of it is like based in science. It's a phenomenal um, once you're aware of this stuff and once you know the power of it, because
Mhm.
how we are here in this burnout zone, it's literally science.
Yeah.
So if there are folks tuning in to this and they're feeling challenged by burnout, like, number one, I just want to offer that self-compassion piece.
Yeah.
Like, please don't judge yourself for this, because it's your body is doing this uh, because we're not applying the science and to support us
Mhm.
and to favor us. And so we are experiencing that burnout because of that lack of applying the science. And so often at the time, we just don't know the science because we were never taught this stuff.
Yeah. You talked about those 2 main pieces. Maybe share a little bit more about what that was when you were doing that self-discovery process.
Yeah. So one of them was doing like on the career related side of the house, and it was spending hours of coming to the realization that I was spending hours of my day doing work that was truly draining my soul.
Right.
And I know you kicked this off with my MBA in HR management, and I was like my former life. I spent many years in HR, and I got into HR for two main reasons. One of them, my father, retired now, but a successful executive, and he told me, he's like, I could see you thriving in the HR world,
Mhm.
and I take his advice very seriously, and so that kind of like put me in that direction. And then number two, I love helping people. And so in my mind, yeah, this is a beautiful marriage. Let me get into this HR world. And I did. Spent many years there, climbed up that ladder, and it didn't happen overnight, but I came to the realization that I was not able to help people in the way that they wanted to be helped. And that was slowly eating away at me. And so realizing that this daily work was out of alignment with me at my core. That was one big piece of awareness. And then the other piece of awareness was, it goes back further in my life, where I conditioned myself to put a lot of pressure on myself. And that came from one of the things I one of the things I and I'm sure there were more elements to this, but one of the main things that contributed to that was being very different growing up in my town. And by different, I mean I was one of the only gay kids growing up in my town. And on top of that, seeing the news, watching the news, and coming across these news stories where other gay kids around the country were being beat up or being killed even. And so in those moments, my brain went into survival mode, really. It because that, and we can get into this if it's relevant, but that amygdala in our brain, it's connected to our fear response center, constantly scanning for threats. Thing is, with that amygdala, it doesn't know the difference between a real and a perceived threat. And so in those days, I was looking at that footage. I was listening to these stories, and it wasn't directly happening to me. Yes, I'm gay, but those things weren't happening to me. But yet my brain took me there and kind of conditioned me to put pressure on myself to fit in. And in my town, there are really only like two main ways in which to fit in. One was to be an athlete, one was to be like more of the nerd.
Right.
And I chose more of the nerd path because I just felt like I had more control over that. And the more I studied, the more, I just put so much pressure on to get those straight A's. And when I got those straight A's, all of those accolades came, and it was all that positive reinforcement, positive
Mhm.
spiral of like, oh my God, yeah, I am fitting in. Let's keep it going. Let's keep it going. Let's keep it going. And that translated into my college years for sure. It translated into my professional working career, always putting too much pressure on myself to exceed, to always
Mhm.
exceed. And that I now know is just not sustainable. And so those if I would have to drill it down, those are the two biggest pieces of what was causing my own lack of stress mastery slash I'm going to end up on that burnout train quite often, which I did.
Right. It's intriguing to me because you mentioned in the explanation of those 2 points, there's a couple of things that really came out for me. One was that lack of alignment piece, feeling out of sorts in that, and the drain that comes along with that lack of alignment, which is really important to note. The other piece I really want to identify here, and it's important because it's a point that you made on the second point, which is for me, and I think there's a lot of evidence coming out around this. You follow Gabor Mate, who talks a lot about trauma and its impact on our psyche. One of the things we are realizing is that unresolved trauma can sometimes relate to the kinds of behaviors that then will precipitate us into burnout situations. I'll give an example. For me, being from big T, little t trauma as a child, what happened was then I didn't respect my own boundaries, didn't respect my own self-worth, didn't say no, people pleased. All those things that were a result of that unresolved trauma resulted in me burning out and not knowing my own limits or respecting my own limits. So it's important that you mention that because going into that survival mode at a very young age, and I would say even this message is even more important today, and we'll just leave it at that, is we need to learn how to not internalize what all is going around us, but know or learn or figure out how to move our bodies, hack our own biology to sort of keep ourselves steadfast, even when things are sort of chaotic around us and swirling. Okay, I want to kind of deal with this notion of science because you brought that up. So I kind of want to bring it to that because again, there's science with trauma, there's science with alignment and all that. From your perspective, can you describe to the audience, and I think you and I are on the same page around this in terms of understanding the science. So let's try to bring it to them to understand when we talk about science and burnout, what does that mean? And what are some of the things they can start doing sort of help themselves when they're feeling that sort of crisis mode start to pop up for themselves?
Yes. So at the end of the day, I like to say that we're basically walking nervous systems.
Yep.
And if we just call it what it is, that we're human, and right, and just like all other living creatures, every living creature has a nervous system built in, and we're guided by that. And so we as humans, we have these nervous systems, and I call them beautiful nervous systems because like without that, we wouldn't really have anything to protect us and to serve us in that way. And so yeah, we should be grateful for these nervous systems. And so on that note, because we have these innate nervous systems, stress response system built into us, we have this like so there's two sides, right? We have the parasympathetic nervous system, the sympathetic nervous system.
Mhm.
And the sympathetic nervous system is that stress response.
Yeah.
So when we are, I mentioned the amygdala just a bit ago, and that amygdala is constantly scanning for threats.
Mhm.
Doesn't know the difference between real or perceived. So I think that's number one of our job, to kind of be mindful of like, is this actually a real threat? Is this actually a real danger? What's the answer to that? If it's yes, okay. If it's no, we can make different decisions and choices.
Yeah.
But what happens when our stress response is engaged? So when that amygdala is constantly scanning and it identifies something as a threat, we then go into that stress mode. And what happens to us biologically is that literally like cells are taken away from different organs within
Yeah.
our bodies to serve that response. And we're designed to do that. It's so powerful. We're designed to do this. And we want it to work in the cases of real danger. And that's the beautiful thing. Where it becomes harmful for us, because we're not designed for us to stay in that stress mode, right? We're designed to kind of flow in and out. It's kind of like that flow in and out between the sympathetic nervous system, the parasympathetic nervous system. And the parasympathetic nervous system is that rest and digest. It's more that homeostasis mode. We want to be flowing in and out of it. That is really like the goal of us as humans with these nervous systems. And so
Mhm.
if we get activated and we stay in that stress mode, these cells, think about it, the cells that are taken away from their normal daily jobs, and they're going to serve this fight, flight, freeze, whatever reaction we're going to do in the moment, and it stays there for longer periods of time, we're actually taking those cells away from serving us in these other ways.
Yeah.
And that's where some of these harmful things come to us, and that's where things become dangerous for us long term if we get caught up in that stress response. But some of these things that are happening when we're triggered, we are like the pupils dilate as one thing. The heart rate increases.
Mhm.
The breathing gets more shallow. All in ways for us to like the GI tract kind of stops, right? Because these are all things that are designed to support us if we need to do something um, that requires a lot of energy for us to survive whatever danger is in front of us. So that's what biologically that's what happens when that stress response is engaged for long periods of time, and then can lead to all sorts of physical health issues down the road if we're not mastering this, um, mastering the flow.
Yeah.
That's what can happen. That's what does happen if we're not mastering the stress, and what can we do to master it?
Mhm.
So one of my clients, basically, I have summarized all of the science into 10 domains, 10 different categories, and one of my clients affectionately called it, "These are the O'Brien 10." And I was like, "Oh, that actually has a ring to it." I can't take credit for the name, but she did. I also can't take credit for the science, but I can take credit for, like, summarizing all of this science into these 10 buckets, and if we optimize these 10 buckets, and I purposely use the word optimize and not perfect because there's no such thing as perfection.
Mhm.
This is all about optimizing these 10 areas. Then we are going to be mastering the stress, and when we master that stress, all of those are the things that you said at the top of this hour: health, joy, passion, energy. That's all going to be optimized, fulfillment in our lives as well.
The, American Psychological Association talks a lot about the rise of this sort of stress, burnout, chronic illness linked to stress, especially in younger, adults, and I'm wondering whether it's a societal or an environmental issue, what are some of the trends from your perspective, or what are you seeing in your clients, or some of the trends that are contributing to that?
Yeah, based on my experience and what I know so far about this topic, it's one of the main reasons why I believe that so many of us are experiencing a heightened state of this activated stress slash burnout is because if we compare ourselves to the cave people days, and I know none of us were alive back then, but if we can just imagine that we were, I am not suggesting that they did not lead a stressful life. They're human, right? We it's all about this flow state. They they hunted, they gathered, they lived in small communes. I'm sure thinking of where their next meal was going to come from was a huge stressor for them. The difference, the way I see it, the big difference is that from where we are now to the cave people days is that we are bombarded with all sorts of information today that they did not, that they weren't. The technology that exists today was not
Mhm.
existent back then. And yes, there are amazing advantages to this technology, this being one of them.
Yeah,
Us being able to have this conversation
yeah.
is one of them, and us being able to share this information to other listeners and viewers, absolutely, that's a huge benefit to technology.
Mhm.
But with that technology comes all sorts of information that comes our way, whether it's through the mass media, whether it's through social media, whether it's through newspapers, magazines, whatever the case may be. And like the majority of that stuff is negative.
Yeah,
The majority of it is negative, and because it's like that amygdala is constantly going, it unless we're keeping it in check, that amygdala is thinking that everything that we're hearing negative is a danger.
yeah.
And I truly believe this is one of the reasons, main reasons why so many of us are where we are with mastering this stress.
Yeah, and I think I love the notion of bringing in the electronics because one of the things that, I have personally found and is the mass media, social media in particular, in the last 10 years has really contributed to a lot of stress, myself included, where I have to have, I would call it, media fasting days in order to be able to get my mindset back on track, because it'll easily put you in a spiral if you're constantly in the news feed. And let's be frank, over the next 4 years, you guys are gonna have to figure out a way to turn it off, because it will
Yeah.
get to everybody. I don't care what side of the coin you're on. At some point, you need to turn it off, right? And in order to be able to survive. And I would like to add to the caveman conversation is I don't think we even need to go that far. Here in Canada, we have Indigenous populations who in the last 50 to 100 years have seen an incredible marked increase in suicide rates, in obesity, in high blood pressure, in diabetes, in diseases that were non-existent when they were living traditional lives not 100 years ago. And
Yeah.
so, from a scientific perspective, if we do sociological studies on what has happened in communities around the world, our Indigenous populations are living with Western diseases that didn't exist just 50, 60, 80 years ago, because they were more in community, more of that sort of living off the land, that kind of thing. So it's interesting to me. Those are really excellent points. Now, switching from the individual to the organization, because I think some of the listeners that listen to this are executives, because that's my target audience. And so, as leaders in organizations, how do you talk to them around the impact that employee stress can have on business outcomes, and
Yeah.
what they might want to start thinking about in terms of improving the stress levels of their employees?
So, I know at one point this whole burnout word was considered to be like a work only
Yeah.
uh, concept, and I want to kind of debunk that right off the bat, because this whole notion of burnout can come from any which direction. Because as I mentioned before, we're basically walking nervous systems, and if we're not proactively mastering it, we're going to hit
Hmm.
there. Um,
Hmm.
and even if it's coming from a something personal in their life, that is going to infiltrate into the workplace.
Hmm.
And that is absolutely going to have an impact into the workplace. And some of the things that have been shown already through studies and through research is that when you have employees who are burned out, they're not putting forward their best. They don't have the energy to put forward, first of all. Um, their engagement drops.
Right.
Interpersonal connections can be challenging when we are not coming to work as our best selves. And when you combine all of this stuff with higher turnover, lower engagement, lower productivity, heightened situations in between employees, like from an employee relations perspective, that is going to negatively impact the bottom line. And I get into all sorts of things as to what organizations do to try to fill in that gap that can lead to also impacting the bottom line in a negative way. Because the most important thing that we can do and that we should be doing is really, number one, teaching this stuff. And number two, making sure that the support systems are there to optimize that learning. Because at the end of the day, the only person that can choose to do this is the person themselves. And that's why I approach this both at the individual level and also at the organizational level. And I strongly believe like that the person has to make that active yeah, this is not a good feeling. I don't want to feel burned out anymore. I want
Mm.
to make changes. That's paramount. That's an imperative step to this journey towards impacting that bottom line in a more positive way.
Yeah.
That said, coming from the top down is equally as important, because we need to be sharing this knowledge to employees, uh, because maybe they don't know what they don't know.
Yeah, I have often found that the clients that I've worked with, that in the past they would see their stress management or the burning out, the walking the burnout line as a badge of honor almost. Like, I worked, 85 hours last week, as if that was a badge of honor,
Yep.
rather than recognizing it as a red flag that something is off in what they're doing if they're working, 85-hour weeks or what have you. I'm
Yep.
exaggerating a little bit, but that's really what they say to me in terms of like the level of effort that they're putting in. They're constantly on their phones. That to me is just not sustainable, right? And I love the notion that you bring forward around the fact that we are whole individuals, and what happens at home, in our relationships, in our physical form affects how we perform at work, and it can affect our relationships, etc. Love that. That's such a great important point. So then how do you then guide organizations? The reason I'm going, okay, so let me start with this question actually. Step back. Something I've experienced and some of the clients I've worked with is there's these mental models around wellness that it may be, quote, too woo woo, too heart centered, too soft. So then how do we move beyond that sort of some of the Western corporate perspectives around wellness coaching, wellness therapies? And because I recently, the reason why I bring this up is because I recently launched a retreat locally here. We're a government town here in Ottawa, but we had a hard time getting signups because the perception of sending folks during austerity measures to wellness retreats just does not seem like a good fit. It was too woo-woo for what we were, when in fact, what we were actually doing was providing a wellness retreat to actually increase performance and enhance stress management. But there seemed to be a disconnect between what organizations are willing to invest in and what they really are looking for. So I wonder, I just have some, I'd love to hear your perspective around that.
And so if I'm picking that up right, the organizations that you've partnered with so far, they consider this wellness concept as woo-woo,
Maybe.
maybe, and yet
Yeah.
they want to have some sort of event centered around enhancing the stress management piece to impact that bottom line in a better
Yeah.
way.
Not all the clients, just I've only had 1 or 2 that were kind of pointing that out, and I thought, "That's interesting," because I kinda consider wellness and executive cadre to be a performance add-on. It's the reason why athletes have not just their coach for the track, but they have mindset coaches, and they have breathwork coaches, and they have all these various coaches because every single facet of those things adds to their performance, and so I found that
Yeah.
intriguing, and I wondered if you had any perspective around that, given that you work with organizations as well. I was just curious if you'd heard any of that, and if so, how did you work around that, or how did you help the clients to understand the link between what we do in terms of helping people become more well and become more stress resilient, and the outputs that the company can expect, or the
Yeah.
organization might expect? Yeah.
So a
To
couple of things. One is I when it comes to leadership, I can appreciate the pressure that they're under.
Mhm,
And while I'm no longer in a position of leadership in an organization myself,
mhm,
I I can understand the context and the that level of pressure that they're under, and to be kind of number driven, to be science driven, to be data driven, I think is important for them to know
mhm.
and for them to get behind, because that's the language that they're speaking.
Yeah,
That's the language that they speak, and when they are connecting with their leaders, this is the language that they speak. So I think maybe it's possible that when we speak about wellness coaching or a wellness event, those words don't necessarily translate into
exactly. Yeah,
into those numbers and into that data. Whereas I do believe that when we speak about the impact, when we speak about the research that has already been done, the studies that Gallup has already conducted, and
yep,
and and other organizations out there in the US as well that have performed to identify that when we get a handle on this stress piece, the things that I mentioned before um, go in the reverse order. Engagement
right.
increases, turnover drops, and then bottom line, ultimately, like productivity increases, and then bottom line increases for sure. And so it's, I think it's all, and that's number one. Number two, I really think it's driving home the point, and it's so cliche, but for all of the travelers out there, hear it all the time whenever they get on a plane, and they say it for a reason. And
Yep,
this is from an individual perspective. This is also from an organization perspective. If you are not serving yourself first,
yep,
there's no way you can serve other people. And the thing that I'm going to on the planes is like putting on that oxygen mask first, like in the case of an emergency. You got to put yours on first for you to help other people.
yep.
That's an individual thing, that's an organizational thing. And you think about this burnout, right? These burnout numbers are rising. That is the emergency. That is the plain emergency right now.
Yeah.
And this event, the event that you're speaking of, is a way to kind of help put that mask on that organization,
Yeah.
so that they can start to then support the employees of that organization. That's the way I see it.
That's ultimately how we positioned it. But it's interesting because I just curious about what your thoughts were on that. So as we kind of start to think about closing out today, I really want to get some tangibles for someone who might be listening today, feeling that overwhelm, feeling that internal strife, the stress. They think they might be on the brink of burnout, not too sure, but they're thinking yes. What's a very accessible step that they can start taking to start turning things around?
So, I don't know
That's a
if we'll
big
have
question, by the way. I recognize that's a big question.
it is a big question, and I
Yeah.
don't know if we'll get through the entire O'Brien 10, but that's okay. I can highlight a few of these things, domains of science, if you will.
Yeah, even
That
if you focus on 1 or 2 that you think are the life changers of the 10, like, whatever you feel is right.
Yeah,
Yeah,
'cause on the there's 5 of them that are just, like, truly, like, going back to basics, and I think those are
right.
important to highlight. I'll highlight a couple of these things because we lose
Mhm.
sight of these. And then there's a couple that we may not be thinking about all the time.
Right.
So first, a couple from getting back to basics is, which one will I pick? Because they're all so equally important. Um, I'm gonna pick I'm gonna pick breathing. I'm gonna pick this breathing thing, and just from some science to throw at you and the listeners here, is that our brains use approximately 20% of our total body's total oxygen supply. That's a significant percentage.
Yeah.
And so even with shallow breathing, which I guarantee you, like, literally everyone, including myself, is doing right now on this
Mhm.
call, even that shallow breathing can lead us down a path to burnout if we're not keeping that in check. If you have animals at home, if you have pets at home, just take a moment to think about them. The next time that you're with them, look at them. I guarantee you that they're mostly deep breathing. And in the times where they may feel a little bit nervous or jumpy and anxious, yeah, they'll shallow breathe, but that doesn't last.
Mhm.
They go back to that deep breathing. And that's really the goal for us as humans, I always say, is to figure out how we can kind of get back to more of that deep breathing. There are so many different methods out there.
Mhm.
And the beautiful thing about the science that I'm highlighting, yes, it applies to us all as humans, but then how we apply it into our life is going to be very, very different. One of my
Mhm.
clients the other day, I was started to talk about one of these breathing methods called the box breathing method. The box breathing method is when you inhale for a count of 4, you hold for a count of 4, you exhale for a count of 4, then you hold again for a count of 4. That there's a lot of science behind that. The Navy SEALs have used that method, and they've seen some really positive results from it. But this particular client of mine, she's like, "I can't stand numbers. Numbers give this person anxiety," and so, all right, that's okay because, like, that method may not be for everyone, and that is totally okay. The point is that there's so many different methods out there, even in that soft belly breathing. That's a method. Whatever works for you. The point is to see how we might be able to incorporate a little bit more of that deep breathing into our day as a
Mm.
next step from
Yeah.
the breathing category. So that's one of the categories on the getting back to basics. And then another one that I also love to highlight um, is nutrition,
Mhm.
eating right. And eating right is going to be different for everybody. And so I'm not going to kind of tell you like what that golden diet is because there is none. You have registered dietitians who don't always agree on everything today, so I'm not gonna spend time talking about, like, that. This is a very complex category, but from a scientific perspective, I love sharing this fact. Did you know that approximately 90% of our serotonin, which is one of our feel-good hormones, is produced in the gut? The gut and the brain, super intimately connected by the vagus nerve. They're constantly talking to one another and sending messages to one another. And serotonin, if that serotonin is lacking, that could very likely contribute to us feeling towards that burnout train.
Mhm.
Um, But I will just, I'm not going to share a diet, but I am going to share some CDC recommendations, which is what I always do when I talk about this stuff, because I think that's important. This is the stuff that registered dietitians all agree on. This is baseline. And so what we should be doing as a baseline, of course, if there's any allergies, consult with your physician on it. But we should be optimizing the vegetables, the fruits, the fibers, the lean proteins, the grains, the whole grains. That's where the fibers come in. The healthy fats, those omega-3s are super, super important. Our brain loves those omega-3 fats. Optimizing all of that is what we need to be doing, and what we shouldn't be doing are kind of, and then I know there's a lot that comes with this, and myself as a sweet tooth have trouble talking about this part of it, but the added sugars is what we should be limiting or avoiding, the added salts limiting or avoiding, and those ultra processed foods. These are all, they're basically fake, and it's basically toxic for us, and impacting and hurting the gut and the rest of our body because they're not real whole foods. And so that's another category of getting back to the basics. And now a couple on the other side of this O'Brien 10 that we may not be so aware of. Which one shall I choose? One of them is, I call it expression. And what do I mean by expression? That specifically as it relates to our emotions and managing these emotions, expressing these emotions in healthy ways, of course. And so the goal that I share when I talk about this topic is to kind of create an emotional highway without traffic. So a trafficless emotional highway. And I say that because we are human, and as humans, we're emotional beings. We literally have neuropeptides floating throughout our bodies. And these neuropeptides are telling us what to feel.
Yeah.
And they're controlled by the brain. So the brain is telling them what to feel based on what the brain is thinking. And so, yes, we do have control over this. But what generally happens, especially with the emotions that don't feel so good, we bottle it up, we suppress it. And we do that for a few different reasons. We've been conditioned that way. Society says that's the way to do things, like man up, move on, get over it, suck it up, all these different things we've heard. We've basically been taught the unhealthy way to manage our emotions. There's a whole body of science called the mind-body syndrome here that I strongly encourage you to take a look in, because what this science is showing us is that when we repress, there's only so much room in the physical body for these emotions to be stored.
Yep.
And at some point they will boil over. And they will boil over in different ways for different people. And they could boil over in physical ways, whether that's headaches, migraines, skin rashes, GI issues, nausea. I experienced that last round of burnout I told you about over a few years ago, literally an eyelid twitch for like a year straight. I'm not even kidding, a year straight of an eyelid twitch. Not painful in any way, but super, 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 super annoying and frustrating. I also had vision impairment because I wasn't mastering my, and that was actually scary. Again, not painful, but I thought I was losing my sight. So all sorts of things can lead us in this physical way. And then of course, emotional symptoms, you have your anxiety, you have your depression, 100% can lead you there. And then the behavioral stress symptoms, like whether we're going to we generally go to the quick fixes that feel good in the moment because they feel good in the moment. Right now we don't feel so good, and we don't know what to do to confront it, or we're too frightened to confront, because this work is scary. It can be very scary to confront these types of emotions. I'm not talking about this lightly. Easier said than done, for sure. But we generally go to these quick fixes because they do feel good in the moment. And so whether that's going to the drink or the cigarette or the drugs or the shopping or the sweets, like the foods or the salts, if you're a savory person, we go there because they feel good in the moment. But long term, we know they're not good for us. And I know everyone here knows that too, but it just feels so good in that moment. And so that's why I say that trafficless emotional highway, releasing them. So basically, how do you do that? There's always going to be a trigger. There's always going to be something that makes us feel something, right? Because we're human.
Yep.
which is being mindful of what we're feeling,
Mhm.
acknowledge it. I even say honor it.
Mhm.
May not feel good to honor it because it may not be a fun emotion, but it's part of the human condition. So you're honoring a part of yourself in that way. And then in as real time as possible, release it in a healthy way. And there's so many different ways in which we do that. This is just some of the ways, but there's a ton others. But like some of my clients have like writing is their thing. So they like to journal this out. They like to write poetry, write songs even.
Mhm.
Some people like talking. So some people go into nature and talk to trees. Some people talk to the sun. Some people talk to, and speaking about woo-woo, I'm sure those leaders are like, what? I'm sure that's
Yeah.
pretty woo-woo. But it works. Like,
Yep.
and I'm not suggesting that talking to a tree is going to work for you, but like finding what will work for you in a
Yep.
way to release these emotions in healthy ways. Some people working out or dancing, like getting it out physically is what helps them release these emotions in healthy ways.
Yeah.
So that's all about emotional expression. And then one other quick one that I really, really love talking about, and we started to get into it at the top of this hour, so I'll close it out here. And that's all about connection.
Right.
And and that connection piece, I highlight three prongs. One is connecting with other people. We're born to connect. We're social beings. And while I think this is, well, I know this is really important, I don't really spend too much time talking about like ways to do that,
Mhm.
because I think these two other prongs are not as talked about. Just going back to the connecting with other people, even introverts need that some level of connection with other people.
Yeah.
And and that it's just so important. And the two other prongs in this connection umbrella are what I call connecting to your environment. And that's like your physical environment, whether that's like your home environment, your work environment, your workspace,
Mhm.
um, your city, your town,
Yep.
even your state, your country, even. Like how
Mhm.
connected, how fulfilling do you feel these places are for you? How
Mhm.
energizing do you feel that these places are for you? And what might you be able to do differently to optimize these spaces that will serve you in more helpful ways? That's number one. One little like personal story there. Like I'm at the end of a home renovation myself, and my whole theme was like I'm obsessed with the beach, if you can tell from the background behind me, but the water fuels me, and I live in New York City, and that there's a disconnect there, right? But in the interim, with this home renovation, like my whole theme was like beach vibes,
Yeah.
and we accomplished that. And so that was one way for me to kind of bring the beach to me, until I can figure out how to get to a beach more full time.
Yeah.
Um, so that's connecting to your physical environment, and then that last prong is all about connecting to self. This is just so much power and so much magic behind this one. And what do I mean by yourself, connecting to yourself? Do you know who you are, number one? Do you
Who you
know
really are. Who you really are, not what
who
other
you
people
really
think you should
are?
be. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
What is your, and I do a lot of work with personality type in connection with that Myers-Briggs piece.
Yeah.
There is so much science here, folks.
Mhm.
40 to 60% of our personality, we're actually we walk, we come into this world with, which is so if we know that, we can do so much with that
Mhm.
to avoid stress and burnout. So knowing that personality type, knowing your values, knowing what's important to you, are the decisions that you're making and the actions that you're taking in your day out of alignment with that or in alignment with that? If they're
Mhm.
out of alignment, burnout will happen.
Yeah.
It's just a matter of time, and this is not meant to scare you, but it's just in the science, because it's not sustainable. And then that third piece is like, what is your mindset? What might you be telling yourself that's not serving you,
Mhm.
that's not supporting you? Sometimes we get these neural pathways that are in our subconscious at this point, because that's how the brain works. It's just machines, and it brings things to the conscious and the subconscious. Some of that could be negative. Some of that could be that limiting beliefs, the negative self-talk, and I invite you to explore what that might be and how you might be able to disrupt that to create a more serving mindset. So that's what I mean about connecting to yourself. And I those are just four categories of the 10, and I'll stop there.
No, that's amazing. Such good amount of there's so many good tips in that. So folks, like, rewind and re-listen to this last section of the podcast, because there's a lot of really good stuff in there. Part of the reason why I brought in somatic breath work, or heart breath, as is the trademark that I utilize, into my practice as executive coach, is because going into the body, tapping into that parasympathetic, sympathetic nervous system to get right back into the very systems where you store that stress in the body, in the peripheral nervous system, is super magical in terms of being able to connect with it, release it, connect with it, get some new, perspectives around it. That's why I bring in breath work into the work I do with my leadership. In fact, I had a session we ran a few weeks ago, and it was interesting because I had 50 or so odd execs at the table. And I said, okay, so we're going to do a breathwork exercise together. And then we're going to do a visualization exercise. And it was interesting because a lot of these folks had really never entertained this. And I could see the resistance. And I thought, no, we're going to do this. We're going to trust the process. And it was amazing, the feedback after, like, wow, I feel so much calmer. I feel so much more relaxed. It's like, yeah, dude, like, it's based in science. So we would not be doing this if it didn't work. Right. So it's so
Yeah.
cool. I love the fact that you brought up nutrition. This is something that I struggled with, and I'm still carrying an extra 60 pounds as a result. I gained a ton of weight over COVID response as an exec, literally 45 pounds in about 18 to 24 months, just based on the drinking I was doing, which I no longer do, based on the food, based on the lack of balance, based on the cortisol, which was storing into my fat cells instead of releasing it. So all those things have such an impact. And all to say that, folks, like, just to bring it back to full circle to compassion, you know what Andrew mentioned at the front end of this? Be self-compassionate, because where you are right now, it doesn't mean you need to be there 2 years from now, but it might take a while. It took me 2 years to gain 45 pounds. It's going to take me 2, 3 years to lose it. I mean, I can lose it faster, but if I'm really doing the healing and really going in and really allowing myself to move through the phases, that's the only way to shed it for forever. Right. And so, love, love, love everything you brought to the table today. So thanks so much for being here, Andrew. There's so much that we do that's in parallel. It's kind of crazy. I love this. I love this. Just for folks to be able to find you, if any of this resonated, you want to connect with Andrew, you want to maybe do some business with him, where can they find you? But all the socials will be in the show notes, but what's the best place for them to find you?
Yeah, thanks for asking. And the best place is really my website, which is the mindblowingcoach.com.
Beautiful.
And there you're going to be able to find, if you're interested in to see what the other 6 domains are, there's a freebie there of the PDF that highlights these 10. So go ahead and grab that download. It's on the free resources tab. And then if you want to spend, like, on the individual side, if you're looking to work with me as a coach and you just want to learn more, schedule that free session with me there. That link is on my website as well. And then if you're an organization that's looking to learn more about what I might be able to do for you and your company, that same link you can use to schedule that free time with me as well.
Perfect. Again, everything will be in the show notes to be able to reach Andrew. Thanks again for being on the show. I appreciate you. And thanks again to the listener for tuning into today's episode. Whether you're watching on YouTube or you're listening on a podcasting, audio podcast platform, if you have anything positive around this, please put it in the notes, share, like, subscribe, follow, do all the things, because it's free and it helps the show get out to other leaders who need this kind of information in their podcast inboxes, if you will. And if you're looking for any solutions or wellness challenges, you know where to go. You can contact Andrew or myself. So happy to be here. I hope you'll join us on future podcast episodes. And in the meantime, remember to stay inspired, stay grounded, and remember to exhale.